Thanks, everybody, and a big warm welcome on a chilly morning from us today. We're super excited to be hosting you all for our Talking Point event on getting back to work post-COVID. It's been some time since we've been able to have our community all together in a room, and we're very excited to have you all today. For those I haven't had a chance to meet just yet, my name is Chris Morfess. I'm a senior consultant at SpringPoint. Technology. There we go, we're underway. I'd like to start by first acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's really exciting to see so many familiar faces in the room and also quite a few new ones too. It's always lovely to meet new folk in this network that we like to build. For those who are a little bit unfamiliar with who we are, I'll just provide a little bit of backdrop. So we're SpringPoint. We're a consultancy that aligns culture to strategy through scaled behaviour change. Our purpose is to change the way we work to improve the way we live. And in practical terms, we spend our time in the areas of culture, leadership, capability and transformation. As mentioned before, we are super excited to be hosting our first in-person event in some time. I won't labour the reasons behind that. I think we're all kind of across that. But I think if you look at the heading and the title of today's session, that provide a little bit of a hint. So the Talking Point Breakfast Series is a series that we've been hosting for many years now. And our aim is to provide progressive thinking, external connection with internal application, and a good dose of caffeine, of course. You can expect an ever-changing format, so we do like to mix things up. Topics that cover emerging themes for our clients and partners, and representation from diverse organisations and industries. Speaking of which, this is a little bit of a snapshot of who we've got in the room today. As I said before, we're really delighted to have such a mix, so much diversity in the room, so many different organisations and contexts. And perhaps while we're on that topic, I might just quickly introduce our SpringPointers in the room. If I can get you folk to stand up and I'll just point you out. So we've got a few of us scattered across the room. We've got Dylan down here, we've got Diana over here, we've got the lovely Tori up front, we've got Emma at the back, Soraya, Meg, Noel as well, of course. So if you need anything today, please feel free to tap one of us on the shoulder. Okay, let's get stuck in. So I've got a very quick activity just to start us thinking about this topic and get us in the right headspace. I'd like to start by just taking a couple of minutes. We're going to keep this really short and sharp. In your little circles, just introduce yourselves, recognising that there might be a few circles here where everyone knows each other, so you might breeze through that part pretty quickly. But I'd also like you to share what's one thing you've loved and one thing you've loathed about returning to the workplace. So have a little bit of a think about that and share your responses in your little groups. For example, one thing that I've loved is being able to have spontaneous conversations again, being able to throw conversations or questions across the room and get a quick response. And one thing I've loathed is having to wear pants again. That's a joke. So take it 1 or 2 minutes, introduce yourselves and share what's one thing you've loved and one thing you've loathed, and we'll regroup shortly. So take a minute now.
Yep.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to regroup now. Sorry to interrupt the conversations. I'm sure there was some very exciting comments and reflections on that key question. I might just get a couple of quick responses. What are a few loves that we heard? What are a few things we loved about returning to the workplace? Any volunteers? Structure. Yeah. Structure's a good one. Any others? What have we loved about returning to the workplace? Anything else that shoots to mind? Culture? Yeah. Connection with people, absolutely. Zoom's not quite the same, is it? What about loathe? What sort of loathes did we come up with? Commute, absolutely. Ironing a shirt. Exactly. It's very similar to having to wear pants, you might say. Exactly. Cool. Well, thanks very much for taking a few moments to reflect on that. I'm now going to hand over to a couple of folk who are going to steer the conversation today. First of all, I've got Dylan Flavel, our Managing Director, and Diana Muensberg, our Senior Consultant. both of whom work across our service offering and will be steering the conversation today. So please welcome them.
Thank you. Yeah, all of a sudden, as we talked about pants and things, I started becoming very self-conscious about the fact whether I even had socks on. And then I've actually even managed to land a matching pair. So that's good. It is great to be back. I know we've talked about that a bit, and I've had some conversations with a bunch of people in the room. But yeah, these are really important events for our business, just to connect. But one of the reasons, a number of years ago, that we started these things was really to connect, people in this room, this sort of community of people broadly in the sort of OD people, the leadership and business space. So so it's really terrific. I know it was hard yakka this morning to get through the weather. Deanna and I were thinking yesterday we could be sitting here with an empty room, and I was thinking maybe if we had made it a moccasins and tracksuit pant only event, we may have had it full, no zero attrition. But terrific to have you here. So today's topic, ever since getting back to work for me, I was lucky enough to have a good few weeks off and a good break. I think many of us just sort of fell over the line last year, but upon getting back to work, this sort of topic of, getting back to work has been, one we've been trying to solve. It's important to our business. We look at this sort of connection between work life and home life and how they come closer together in a really rich way. But we know it's really important for our clients in a very practical sense as well. So we've been thinking about this challenge of getting back to work. It's also an interesting problem to solve for, because there's plenty of data around, but quite patchy data in many ways. We're in the middle of a massive social experiment, and experiments take time and data changes over the course of that. So really interesting from that perspective. And also it's just if you're a psychologist, it's a fascinating study in human and organisational behaviour. So trying to solve for this has been an interesting one. Two questions we're going to focus on today, so Deanna and I. The first one I'm going to spend a bit more time on, and it's this first one. Does getting back to work matter? And if so, why? We've spent the whole of last year really looking through, particularly as managers and perhaps some of the professional capabilities in this room around broadly OD and leadership. But we spent the whole year looking or talking through the prism of why working from home works. So we've brought data to the table around that, and we've designed an environment to sort of try and support that. And now we find ourselves on the other side of that prism, sort of trying to tell the opposite story in many cases, which is why working from work is an important thing. So we've prosecuted the first conversation really hard, and now we're sort of trying to flip that conversation. So that's a really important challenge. And the second question, which Deanna's going to dig into a little bit, is if getting back to work does matter, and I'm going to share some data that perhaps suggests that it's important. How do we get that to happen? So in trying to frame up today, we rang around a number of our clients, as we often do, to say, hey, is this relevant for you? Because many of our clients have got policies in place, or they've got a return to work policy, and a lot of them are like, yeah, it totally is, because we've got a policy, but no one's here. So we're like, okay, yeah, let's really hone in on how do we get people back to work. So that's where we're going to spend our time. Our little image up there is a bit about, I guess, the pendulum of where we were last year, and particularly even the pendulum as it relates to the data that we were looking at. So last year, I think very much so, through necessity, we're in the space of looking after people from a safety perspective, and making sure that individuals were able to be productive and supported. That was the lens of last year. And as the pendulum sort of shifts this year, and we get into whatever the term is, whether it's a COVID normal environment, but we get to this situation where, as organisations, we need to be sustainable, effective, and performing. And so it's how do we not do one or the other, but do both? And I guess that's sort of some of the framing for us today. So a lot of the data that I've seen, and I'm sure many of you will be across it as well, has focused very much on an individual perspective of the challenge of working from home, and whether coming back to work is the right thing. So there's a bit of data here that you'll see if you have a look up on screen. Personal benefits of working from home or being remote. So you'll see down there, firstly, do people want to continue to work from home in some way? And the answer is yes. Like 97% of people want to continue to work from home in some way, and a very small percentage of people want to just be fully back in the work. But what are the benefits? So ability to have a flexible schedule, work from anywhere, not having to commute, spend time with family, all of those things. So I'm for sure those variables are very different for different people, different organisations, different work, all that stuff. Talking to people this morning about the patterns or the routines and the habits that have developed, and Diana's going to dig into that a little bit more as we go. But it's different for everyone in this room. So the next one is sort of the flip side of that. And when I think about this idea of an experiment too, I'm sure some of you have sort of ebbed and flowed between those sort of the things that have really worked well and some of the challenges. But what are some of the challenges of working from home? So not being able to unplug, I know that crept in for many people over a period of time. Difficulties with collaboration and communication. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Loneliness, distractions from home, staying motivated. I know that's been a big one this year for many organisations, clients and leaders that we've been speaking to within our work. And also depending on the organisation, you're being a different time zone. So there are things in here that you'll all know well from a personal perspective. And as I say, like they've probably ebbed and flowed from one shape to the other. But this data is very individual centric. And what I wanted to do was to frame something slightly different. So what I really want to talk about now is from an organisational perspective, what are the benefits of being back at work? And the reason I want to really dig into this is that what I've noticed with our clients, particularly over the last 4 or 5 months, is that many of them are trying to get people back to work, and they're asking for that to happen. But as I said, the prism of last year means that individuals are, in many cases, have working from home, feeling really productive. And when they're being asked to come back to work, many organisations that we're working with, and certainly some of the leaders and managers, haven't got a really clear narrative around why. Culturally it'd be really good, and then people going, well, hang on, I'm doing my work now, right? I'm being productive, I'm getting my stuff done. And so without a really clear rationale and the next level of detail below why being at work matters and why being together matters at different times, we can sort of start to see employees be in a position where they go, well, hang on, is it because you don't trust me and you need me to be front and centre and we need to manage through FaceTime? And that was one of the great benefits that actually came out of last year, is that we realised that perhaps we didn't need to do that so much, and there were some real benefits to the empowerment that brought, and some trust that was established with large groups of employees, functions and individuals. So that's a really important reason, is we need a clear rationale as to why coming back to work matters, that sits below that headline of just culturally it'd be a good thing. Secondly, if you know the things that are done better together, then it gives you the ingredients, the base materials, if you like, to start to design a hybrid environment that works, because you go, hey, here are the 4 or 5 things that really matter from an organisational culture perspective from working together, and we can start to design those into our workplace. So that's the framing for today. So to do that, as I said, getting data is an interesting one on this topic, because we're right in the middle of something. I'd be lying if I said there was an extraordinary amount of awesome data around this. There's some good stuff, and we've mixed 4 or 5 key pieces of research which we've shared with you. Obviously, we'll share these slides today, but also on the handout that you have on your seats, you'll see down the bottom there are some key reference materials. We've also spliced that with over 25 conversations with our clients directly on this topic, because in many ways that's the most real and live data to understand what leaders, managers and organisations are experiencing. So what we've done, and I'm going to spend the next sort of 8 or 9 minutes talking through, is how the research and current experience of organisations maps to a model of performance culture, to essentially go, what is working from home doing to help culture, and what is working from home perhaps doing to erode it, and how do we start to just unpick that a little bit? So the frame that we're going to use here is our Springpoint performance culture framework. What's important to know about this, we've spent the last couple of years working hard to develop this framework and a related set of tools, and we've got some wonderful people in this room from Deakin University who've been helping us to interrogate the integrity and do some research on this model and frame. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about this, but what's important to know about it is it looks at culture through the lens of what are the elements of culture that support organisational performance. A really important part of that is that it supports employee health and well-being, of course, but it also looks at what we need to do to deliver sustainable outcomes for our clients, to be innovative, all that sort of stuff. So you'll see up there, if you have a quick look, we've got there's 4 parts to it. It's how do we inspire, which is related to strategy, purpose, and also values within an organisation. We've got how do we deliver, so what are the decision-making practices and the processes that work in our organisation to ensure that we're efficient and we can deliver on internal and external commitments. The bottom piece around enable is really around all the things related to employee empowerment, the way we work well in teams, the way we develop capabilities that support us to execute. And this adapt one is about something that's been so relevant in the past year, but was prior to that either, of course, which is our ability to create change and to be aware of what's going out in the marketplace and to be able to innovate. So that's our frame of reference today, and there are some of the subcomponents that sit underneath it, which we're sort of going to map to. So what I thought I'd do is spend the first few minutes pointing out a few of the things that from the data that we've been able to aggregate, and there is some really good research papers with some huge amounts of data, but some of them have been done on work from home situation pre-COVID, as in sort of 2019, 2020, and we know the game has changed significantly since there. But one of our research partners, Denison, who we do quite a lot of work with, have done a really solid piece of research over the last year as well to look at what are the factors that we know from culture data have changed, good or bad, as well as a bunch of conversations that I shared before. So without any further ado, we'll get into it. So what are the things that have worked from a performance culture perspective when we think about largely work from home environments? Well, the first one is strategic clarity, and I put a bit of an asterisk next to it because I'm also going to talk about it as something that hasn't been so good as well. But strategic clarity, just refers to the fact that do people know what they're doing as it relates to the organisational performance, and can they see a line of sight between their role and strategy? When COVID hit, this has been pretty well spoken about. One of the things that I think most organisations we saw did really well was they really started getting clear on what their priorities were. They knew they needed to support people to keep them busy and focused, and so there was a level of probably an additional level of granularity and pointedness around how strategy was planned out and how it was then cascaded down to individuals to make sure that people knew what they were doing in their own role and team. So really making sure they had a really good line of sight. I'll flip to why that perhaps hasn't maintained as well as we might like on the next slide. The next one relates to effective delivery, and I guess that data on individual circumstance is a really good one through the last year. I mean, people have found they've had more time. They've been able to convert their commute time into more focused delivery. Initially, we definitely saw a lot of people who felt like they had a lot more free time. They had control of their diary. There weren't as many unnecessary meetings, and they probably also found that some of the meetings they were at were a lot more pointed. There's perhaps less time in a virtual environment, or less point. It might be a better way to frame it, to wandering around in circles in a meeting, and we saw things get much sharper and pointier. So generally, it resulted in individuals feeling much more productive, and you'll hear that from many people. I'm sure there are others who are going, hang on, that's actually now flipped for us. We're doing the same stuff that we were doing now in our virtual environment. But we certainly saw some significant shifts in there, and it's a common conversation, and also in the data that we're seeing, that productivity, particularly on tactical activity, has improved in many cases. We've also seen, at a practical level, reduced operational costs, and there's some good research out there, and organisations changing their footprint, having different spend on budget spend, staff and workforce management costs. So some real benefits there. The last one is probably from a performance culture perspective, I think the most significant as a factor, but also the most significant in the amount of shift that we've seen, and that is this empowered people and teams. So, individuals have had greater, through necessity, have had greater autonomy and flexibility to essentially perhaps decide what they want to do, but in many cases certainly decide a little bit more how they're going to do it and be given the freedom to deliver, and empowered people and teams connected to that sort of strategic clarity point. Hey, I know what's important because we've done some work to get people aligned, and now I can sort of get on with it and sort of do the work. We've seen some really fascinating data in this space in particular, and I'll just sort of share this really brief little story. One of our clients we've been working with, they saw over that COVID period a 53 percentile point increase in empowerment. And this is an organisation quite hierarchical, difficult to change, quite change resistant. And this factor, it's tricky to change, and it takes investment in typically leadership and management capabilities to really give people the space and to manage in a slightly different way. So huge increases, and we also saw increases across other areas. But I guess I share this because it really points to the fact that, hey, I mean, working in this sort of whatever environment, if we want to call it a hybrid environment, whatever level of bias or flex that has, it's brought some great benefits, and this is probably the most profound. And also, on our model, if I flick back a little bit, empowered people and teams, it's its own factor, but it relates to other things. It has a strong relationship to change capability, so your ability as an organisation to create change, and a number of other things. So, empowerment, it's a really strong attribute in terms of how an organisation feels, or what it feels like to work somewhere. So some really great benefits, but I'm going to flip onto the things that perhaps the data's suggesting, and many of our clients are suggesting aren't working quite as well. My red's not so red, is it? It's very very light, but that's okay. So you can see where the dots are. They're the bits. I'm not sure, you might be able to see that better than me, but the dots and the little red shadings are the areas that perhaps haven't been as successful for organisations in getting work done, and I think over time are the things we need to continue to focus on and address. So the first one, as I said, little asterisks in there around strategic clarity. There's been so many organisations going through transformative shifts in the last 12 months and prior, but the last 12 months has certainly really rolled a few on even more. And it's challenging solving adaptive and tricky problems in a remote environment. The nature of adaptive challenges are that they're sometimes a bit intractable, and they need people to be deeply engaged in the problem to be able to solve the problem. And it can happen in a remote environment. It's just hard to get to, and what we've noticed is organisations solving those problems but not solving them well with others. So strategy and new directions moving on without necessarily people following, because they just haven't been able to quite garner the engagement in solving that problem throughout. The second one, the dot point down there, is maintaining alignment comes at a price, and that price that we've observed over the last bit is just a level of burnout from managers as strategy and priorities keep shifting, not just perhaps quarter to quarter, but month to month. It takes a lot of effort, perhaps not from individual contributors, but from management layers, people leaders. They have to check in a lot and make sure that people are aligned, and that price is heavy. And so we are seeing a lot of burnout and from that population. So I think that's probably the first one, and why I asterisk strategic clarity as having both some good and bad in there. Strong values, it shouldn't be surprising. It's one of the things that has actually gone backwards mostly in organisations. I would asterisk that it doesn't meant to say that and they've necessarily gone backwards in a bad way. But I think organisations are struggling to get coherence of values across the organisation. And it's no surprise, because people are working often in smaller teams. They're working with their own project team or their own functional team, and they're spending a lot more of their own time in their own workspace. So a default to team and personal values rather than having line of sight to what's happening across the organisation, and getting that visibility of behaviour from other leaders, other teams, etc. So we've certainly seen that change. As I say, it doesn't mean to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking to control values, which again is another debate, if you're looking to control them or get broad alignment, I think what we're seeing is a level of fracturing of that. So that's an important one to flag. This next one is around commitment to purpose. So, we know purpose is really important in giving people sort of intrinsic motivation and connection to why they're here and why they're working at a particular organisation. I was talking to a client last week who we're doing some work with, and they had their first offsite. It wasn't actually offsite; it was a virtual offsite, but their first offsite for a year. And if you think, I know this organisation, I know how they generally operate. They would normally have multiple forms of that, whether it's functional, whether it's some form of whole of organisation or cross-functional event. They would do that multiple times a year in some form, and so those events are often very heavily front-ended and back-end with how our work connects to our purpose. Similarly, when we're working in a virtual environment, when we're on Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be, we're often engaging in a lot of tactical conversation. We don't spend a lot of time just immersing in the company and presence of others, and that's often where this sort of commitment to purpose stuff comes out, as well as walking through the halls and seeing, the type of office plans and layouts we have now mean that we see work that's going on all around the organisation, and we see the multiple ways it's impacting on our central purpose, whether it's our customer or group in the community, whether it's an internal customer, but we see the different work that's further emphasising what we're doing and why it's important. And in our current environment, particularly as we're spending a significant amount of time not in the work environment, we're just getting less stimuli around other things that are happening related to our broader purpose. So we're definitely seeing that shift down, and one that we need to really double down on, I think, as we go forward. The next one won't be a surprise to you. It's super important, collaboration. So we've done an amazing job, of continuing to collaborate, well. Use of technology's picked up particularly well as well. But over the last 10 years, what we know is that formal communication is actually not where most of the work gets done. It's informal communication, which can take place in so many different ways. You will all know this story well, but it's the meeting that gets where the decision gets made in the 5 minutes after the meeting outside the hall. It's the conversations that happen as you go into the room, that means you are connected with another piece of work that's happening in the organisation that just improves your line of sight. And we talk about tactical trust being weakened. So last year, we actually developed a lot of trust in organisations in many ways, because people were trusted to do work, to, let's manage by outcomes rather than face time, all of that sort of stuff. But what we are seeing is teams, and we've talked to a number of clients at the moment in their transformation efforts, they're seeing a lot less integration between streams and a lot less effectiveness, of just sort of people being able to make decisions quickly through knowing other people and knowing what they're doing. So, walking the halls, incidental conversations about work that's happening, that, some of those things that make you just go, oh, wow, I didn't know that was happening. There's a massive connection between that and our work. So that line of sight and visibility has just been reduced a little. Next one is just change capable, so just 2 to go, and then I'll hand over to Diana to sort of talk a little bit about the so what. But this sort of change capable area really talks to innovation, in many ways, and I'm sure it's a little bit similar to the strategic clarity issue, but when we want to do new things or think in different ways, having people both present in the room, even today. I mean, I know my experience coming in here today. I've got to sit up the front. I'm thinking about who's going to be in here. My level of just awareness of what I'm doing and who I'm talking with just lifts, a couple of pegs. And we know that's the case when people are either in person or not in person, in terms of the way they're thinking, the way they behave, and where their attention's tuned to. So you can do it. And this is the thing with all of our work. We've been able to do it. It's just more difficult. And as things become more difficult and we put barriers in place, whether it's to change or whether it's to new strategies, then we tend not to be as disciplined in getting it done, and then we can find that we're starting to move on without everyone moving on with us. The last one is capability development. I think we've done similarly a terrific job. There's so many learning professionals in this room who, I heard some great stories of the different type of micro-learning that's happening, in supporting people. There's been so much great work that's happened over the past year to convert learning to digital, to think about learning in a different way. But one of the challenges, of course, we have is that in the flow, coaching or learning is so important. Right at the point of when you've got a problem, being able to get help and support. And I think even Chris mentioned it. Hey, just being able to ask someone who's sitting next to you, what do you think about this? That can still happen in a remote environment. It's just harder. There are more barriers to it, where some organisations are finding ways to get through that. But where there are barriers, it makes it difficult for us to get to that. As individuals, we are social beings and we learn through observation. So, we're probably not always now seeing that difficult sales call that someone else is on, seeing someone struggle under pressure and see how they apply their own skills around resilience. So we're just probably not seeing the same amount of passive observation, which is a critical element of learning beyond the formal. So they're the 5 or 6 things that the data is saying has changed, and I've tried to bring a little bit of colour to them just around what we're seeing and some examples. You will have your own, and I'm totally aware that different individuals, different organisations are at different points on this continuum, and they'll be experiencing it in different ways. But I guess where we land here is we go, there's some good things that actually our culture has started to propagate through the last year. There's some things that perhaps aren't as good or will start to miss over time. So I guess our next challenge is, if we think there are some good things, how do we get people back to the workplace, knowing that there's been some battles around that? So I'm going to hand to Diana to talk to that.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Dylan has mentioned, there's obviously heaps of advantages to working from home that we've personally experienced. There's also some organisational advantages, but there's also disadvantages. So I think the slide that he just skipped, which was his one, by the way, talked to the point that we will potentially move to a hybrid model. And what we've seen with a lot of clients actually is that they are starting to design what that hybrid environment can look like. And I think that is really important, but there's a step before that, and that is that we actually need to bring people back into the office, because hybrid is only hybrid if they're hybrid. So one kind of perspective we want to take today is the habit perspective. And some of you may know the habit loop. For those of you who don't, the habit loop is a framework for thinking about the formation and destruction of habits. There are 3 parts to the framework: the cue, the routine, and the reward. And the idea is that any automatic behavior or habit that we have is triggered by a cue. That can be anything: a particular time, a location, a person around you, or an emotional state. So for example, let's just use boredom as an example, emotional state. And then there's a routine that is triggered by that cue. So for boredom, this routine could be scrolling through social media. As we all have experienced, our routines and habits over the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months might have changed quite significantly. Instead of getting up and getting ready for work, commuting to work and grabbing a coffee on the way, we might now walk down without our pants and drop the kids to school, hopefully with pants on. But I don't have kids, so I wasn't wearing my pants. So yeah, things have changed, and people have changed the way they work, where they work, how they work, and potentially also when they work. So you've seen potentially at the bottom of emails people indicating that they're now working at late hours, and that that you're not needed to respond at that time, that you can respond flexibly. And that's been really great, but it just shows that things have changed significantly in that routine that we've built. And we'll have a look at those routines, and I'll give you a chance to discuss what has changed for you in a moment as well. But the last thing that I just want to mention about that loop is the reward, because the reward is something really important when we talk about the formation of habits, because it reinforces a routine. So without that reward, routines don't turn into habits. And when we think about how we can change habits, we'll talk about the reward and what the reward of returning to the office could potentially be in a moment. But yeah, as I've said, there are things that have changed, and we've got a little bit of data here. Again, Dylan's mentioned before, there's obviously the individual perspective, and that's what you can see here, and then there's the organizational perspective. But from an individual perspective, definitely people are saying that the way they communicate and collaborate has changed. A few people, 22%, saying it's just a location, nothing else has changed, but I don't really believe them. And then there's work hours, as mentioned before, and how they do their work. Chris got a microphone, so if anyone wants to share their experience, maybe we get 2 or 3 people in the room to just share maybe not just their own habits that have changed, but maybe a collective view of the discussion they've just had.
Hi, I'm Terry Coyne. Yeah, lots of interesting discussion we had just on our one-on-one here, but one that I was able to share, which might be apply to other people in the room, the role of the manager or the role of the boss in this, this relationship we have at work. I gave the example of check-ins, which I think we all probably did, and for me personally, I felt some obligation as a boss. I felt some obligation to be on those check-ins, and so that was an instant change for me. Started off 5 days a week, went down to 3 days a week, etc. But there was that sense of obligation, because if I couldn't be part of that check-in, how could I expect other people to be there? But, and here's where the but was I putting undue pressure on other people? Because the manager's in the room, even though it was Zoom, the boss is in the room, what pressure is that putting on other people to be there where a lot of things would happen on a more informal basis? So that was just one change that I experienced.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we've experienced as well. I don't think Dylan has missed any check-ins, has he? I'm sure he felt obliged as well.
It's a good one. It's a great one, Terry. Actually, that example of empowerment improving so much, but then the rest of those factors in that organisation. Diana and I were both working on this particular project. Actually, I think that was one of the most key change factors for this organisation, increasing their culture results over time, because they had this sort of empowerment thing which is forced through necessity and remote working, but all of a sudden we had just incredible discipline of managers and leaders checking in, and it played out so broadly. So I think it's a really good example. The additional part around expectations of others is a good add.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm also Chris. We talked about the importance of having a separator between the office, work life, and your home personal life. And the commute can obviously be that separator for a lot of people, and that's obviously taken away at home. So you can be working in your home office, and you take 2 steps into the hall, and you're suddenly back in your personal life again, and dealing with family dramas, whatever it might be. And I mean, for me personally, commuting to work on a bike was a great separator for me, and obviously I lost that during COVID. Love having it back, but people find their own. So I mentioned even just taking a shower, having worked at home all day, as it's like a symbolic kind of, right, let's wash work away, now I'm at home and I'm done for the day, and I can step back into home life. So that was something I think a common theme in our group.
Yeah. Even just the order of doing things, personally, I've been the same. Like, I always used to get up and get ready for work and then do my exercise after work. But then as COVID started, I needed something to get me out of bed and get ready. So shifted that to the morning, and I don't really want to change that back now. I'm quite happy to do that in the morning, but obviously there's work you got to go to. So and the commute, we can't forget about the time that it takes to get to work. So I think does anyone urgently want to share their experience as well? Or are we happy to? Yep. Can we? Thanks.
Just reflecting on the conversation that Tori and I were having, in that, given that we're inherently social beings, whenever we're on this online platform, it always feels like you're imposing upon somebody else's time when you try and reach out to them and have a normal conversation. Whereas normally you would just walk over and say, "G'day, what's up? Can I ask you a question?" And it just sort of seems like we've made it a little bit too structured. And that was a particular challenge that I had, experiencing working from home and all that sorts, because if you're in an unfamiliar environment, you're trying to get a little bit more information, it's really difficult to reach out to these people who you feel, you might be like, breaking their flow or interrupting their productivity, and just trying to reconcile with that.
One in that capability development area is just, it might not be around capability development per se, but there are barriers to that, and there are, some technologies that are starting to try and unpick that, but it becomes, the structure becomes, a bit of an impediment to push that through. So,
Right. I don't think we need to labour the point that things have changed and that new habits have formed. But now we obviously need to shift towards how can we make sure that we change those habits again and build new routines. And we're kind of proposing 3 principles. The first one is that we actually need to help our employees form a new routine, and that routine needs to have some rationale to it. So what we've seen a lot is either organisations leaving it completely up to their employees so they can choose when and if they come back into the office, or putting really fixed blanket rules in place, like you need to be back in the office 4 days a week or 5 days a week or 3 days a week, whatever it is, without any rationale. And I think that really speaks to the point that Dylan made earlier. It's important to have a why. The second one, as I've mentioned, the reward is always important, and we'll unpick in a moment what we can do or what that reward could look like for our employees. And then finally, changing habits takes time. So we just need to accept that it's not going to happen from today till tomorrow, and that it's a journey we're on. And it has taken about 12 months for us to feel comfortable working from home, and we've been doing it now for 18 months. So bringing people back and expecting that they're completely comfortable with that tomorrow is not really realistic. So I'd like to speak to each of those principles now, and Dylan might chip in with his own experience in some of those as well. But when it comes to a routine, before we come up with really clear rules or principles or whatever we want to call them, it's important that we share the why. And Dylan has given you really good reasons and examples that we found obviously in research and talking to our clients, why it is important. But I'd really encourage you to unpick your organisational context and make up your story of why it is important to bring your employees back. Another thing that we've seen is that alignment across leaders is really important, because there's still a couple of people who don't think that coming back is the right thing to do at the moment, which is completely fine. We understand that there might be still some safety and health concerns. But mixed messages is not what we need right now. So it's really important that if you've made that story up for yourself, and that obviously can be a really positive story that talks to organisational effectiveness, that leaders are aligned on that, and that might require you to do some re-education. The next one is listen and dialogue. So people have been at the centre of the global pandemic, and their health and safety has been our primary focus, and I really think that we should continue to focus on people's needs and requirements. And that's why it's important to have conversations with them to unpick why they don't want to come back to work or what the barriers are. A lot of our clients have run surveys, which is really great, but I really suggest that those one-on-one conversations to understand individuals and their needs will probably go a further way than just the blanket survey. We've got the point anticipate resistance down there. We've already discussed people don't want to come back. So if you anticipate that resistance throughout the conversations that we're having, it will just help you prepare to have those conversations a bit more prepared, I guess. And then finally, while people are definitely a really, really important part and their needs need to be considered 100%, there's other factors, other really critical factors that we need to consider that impact the location we work from. And it's quite difficult to have that conversation with employees because they have been a priority and they continue to be a priority. But a couple of clients have used different frames, and there's one that I'd like to share with you today because I really liked it and I thought it was quite practical, but that's the frame of deciding where to work based on what works for the customer, what works for the team, and what works for the individual, and in that order. So we're still acknowledging that your needs and your requirements are important, but there's other needs and requirements, organisational and team needs, that need to be considered as well. What we've seen with other clients, and I think that works as well, but it's not as simple, is that they look at an individual role and the requirements of that role and then make the decision based on that. But I guess the end of the story is that we can't really use a equality approach and apply the same rules to everyone, but we really need to go with equity and see what works for an individual person, for an individual role, rather than saying, you know, we're all returning 50% of the time back to the office, or whatever it is. The next point is my favorite one, the reward one. And the Financial Review actually used quite a nice title, and that is, employers need to earn the commute back to work. And I like the idea of earning the commute back to work. And I think there's practically 3 different things that we can do to do that. So firstly, we need to get the basics right. And what I like to call the basics, because it kind of works with my hand sanitizer and my handbag, is the hygiene factors, which is why most of the people here in the room, I'm assuming, are ready to go back and have moved on. There is still quite a few people who don't feel comfortable being in group spaces again, and we need to respect and consider that, and it's completely fine, and they might be right, we might be returning to another lockdown, let's hope not. But, you know, we just need to make sure that they feel safe and comfortable to return. Another little practical thing is just having conversations with some of my friends. They've taken their office chair home or their second desktop or whatever, and they're returning to work, and their at-home setup is so much more comfortable for them to work in. So they're like, why would I go back into the office if it's a hassle? I don't even have access to a room, or I don't have my favorite chair, whatever it is. So yeah, we just need to make sure that these are not barriers that people see or feel. So yeah, getting the basics right. Secondly, I think that's when you've been talking, I was listening a little bit, and that's one of the things people really want, which is connection and collaboration, and that's been challenging virtually. So by designing that into the way we work, we can really show people the value and show them again what it's like to work together and why it's so nice. We need to do that deliberately. So again, some practical actions that we're proposing is when you design meetings or when you schedule meetings, plan them out and plan interactive activities for those meetings. So people can still call in if they can't join, but the people in the room actually understand that there's a value of them having come in for that meeting. And then, as Dylan mentioned earlier, to that development from a manager perspective, walk the floor, have a chat, say hi, have those water cooler conversations, and just make sure that you do connect with people on a more informal basis again.
Yeah, I mean, my only add to that one, Diana, it's just extending on your point, which you made really well, is you know, I've talked to a number of clients who say, yeah, we have to design it in, and we have to make sure that if people are coming along to meetings, whether they're about strategy or about their project, that they're getting things out of that would be really hard to get through a virtual medium. So whether it's getting a lot of data from a number of stakeholders and making sure those stakeholders are prepared to come and bring that data in as you're sharing, because getting people back in the room together is important. But in some organisations, without the planning around what would make that valuable and what would earn that commute, it won't always just serendipitously happen, I think. So that's, yeah, I think, yeah, my only little add there.
No, that's right. And then the final one, social interaction. We've spoken about us being social beings and liking those informal conversations, but some of us, me including, are still a little bit socially awkward coming out of a 12-month lockdown. So again, it might take a little bit of deliberate planning and action to make sure that people can connect socially again. After work activities, or maybe like a breakfast connect for the whole team that's not work related, might again help just to show people that there is a benefit to working together with different people in the room. And then the last one, as I mentioned earlier, it takes time to change habits. And there's a quote from Forbes, and I think that might be an American quote because I can't recall that we were in lockdown for 12 months, but we've definitely been working from home for over 12 months. And we've established new habits, we've established new routines, and we're used to them now, and changing them will take a bit of time. So what we can do to acknowledge that it takes time is firstly put together a thought-through plan. So I'm not sure about you, but when the pandemic started, I was like, oh, what's going to happen? I don't know what the future will look like. And then they put the roadmap in place, the famous COVID roadmap. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. I know what to expect. No one told me that we wouldn't stick to that roadmap, but that didn't matter. It didn't matter because I just felt safe. I felt I knew what to expect. And I think we can do the same at work. If we make our return planning process really transparent, we just give people the time to prepare. And we can do that by providing concrete timelines and dates, and just making people part of it so they don't feel like it's done to them. And that speaks to the point that I made earlier. Talk to your people and try to understand what plan works for them. The second one is, it is going to be a gradual transition. So we will definitely, at some point, move to a hybrid model. We've seen a couple of people who try to return to pre-COVID conditions, and in most cases it hasn't worked. So when I say pre-COVID conditions, it's just trying to do everything like we did it before. So think about that and think about what that environment would look like. And as I shared earlier, a lot of clients have started to think about how they can design that hybrid workplace. But we really suggest to put a couple of people in a room who focus on that and then bring other people in and get their opinions and views on how that can be done. And then finally, be prepared to change the plan again. There's two things to that. Firstly, we don't know, we might be in another lockdown tomorrow. Let's not hope so, but we need to stay and be flexible when it comes to those plans. And the other thing is, while at the moment people might not want to return back to the office, people's sentiment will change. As they change their habits and as they start returning to work, they might realize that they actually love riding their bike to work, and that they might want to do that 5 days a week and not 3 days a week. So continue to listen to your employees and see what they have to say, and as their sentiment changes, you might want to adapt your plan as well. So that's kind of the key 3 principles that we wanted to share today. Have a routine with clear rationale, the reward matters, and changing habit takes time. But we know that you're obviously here to, again, have a little bit of a chat to each other. And we'd love to hear, we've spoken to a couple of clients, but definitely not all of our clients, and definitely not to everyone in the room. So share with the people in your circle, what is your organisation doing to bring people back? What is working and what is really not working? And then, we'd love to hear your experience again.
So does anyone want to share what their organisation is doing, what they've seen working really well, and what hasn't worked so well, or one of the 3? Some volunteers.
Thank you. I'm Marcel De Sanctis from CLA. We were just chatting about getting a lot more clarity around what is the best kind of work to do at home, and therefore doing that there, and then optimising the time in the office and working through what's the best work to do in the office. And so just getting comfortable with those new habits, those new routines, sticking to them, and just talking about how we sort of learnt through that process of reallocating time and reallocating who you catch up with and what you do when. And when that new rhythm is created, you then start to feel a bit more in flow. And then at CLA, one thing that we've done that's been working quite well is, because we're a reasonably smaller team, is having set collaboration days. So saying, look, ideally on a Monday and Friday, we would like to all be in the office. It's a great chance for us to do X, Y, Z, and then the rest of the week is kind of open, if you like. But people have that flex to come in on any days that they like. So, it's just been sort of 2 examples there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's been working for us as well. We've kind of got the same policy, 2 or 3 days in the office together, and we've nominated which of those days they are, so people are not in there on their own. And that's definitely been working for us as well. Anyone else? Oh, Elisa?
Hi everybody, I'm Melissa from Aware Super. Something our organisation has done is our internal comms team has really got involved. So they've had a lot of activities. So things like coffee roulette, where you meet up with someone for coffee. We had Easter egg hunts, we had baristas coming in making us coffees. There was just all this fun and joy, and they created an environment that made you go, oh, it was nice being in the office today. And they did it across the business. So we launched a program called Emerging Stronger, which is our new rhythm of work across the whole organisation. So everybody understood what was required of them. Talking to your leaders, the leaders are very engaged, so our leaders are now role modelling good behaviours, and we're encouraging them to reach out to each other as peers to support that. So we found that the activities actually create a bit of fun, and we've kept those going still since probably about February, March. We kicked off in Sydney and through to the other offices. So that's worked really well, I think, from our area. So thanks.
Great, that sounds awesome. So Dylan, when is a barista coming into our office? Definitely not. Who else wants to share maybe what hasn't worked so well? An attempt that they had at bringing people back and it didn't go as planned. Anyone?
So my name is Mihira and I work with a lot of mental health professionals, and so the easiest rule that they put in was just 3 days a week, come in the office, just a blanket, it doesn't matter what days, just come in. No one has turned up. I think one of the issues is no one's monitoring it, and because it's any day, you'll turn up thinking, oh, I'll see my colleagues, it'll be a good day. None of your colleagues have also turned up, so you're there on your own. And then you think, well, why did I bother coming in? I might as well have just stayed home. So I think having the blanket rule it makes it easier, you know what's expected of you, but it also, if it's not coordinated, it doesn't necessarily end up with the best outcomes. And in mental health, if you have clients that are now in the rhythm of telehealth, how do you then get them to come back in with you? So how do you get your customers and your clients to come back with you into the office? Because they're also still working remotely, and we haven't quite tapped into that part yet. We're still trying to figure out how do we get them to come with us, because a lot of them still don't want to come into the city at all. So that's one of the challenges we're working through as a mental health service.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think that applies to everyone who works with clients, even with us. Like most of our clients still work from home, and trying to coordinate a face-to-face meeting, often it's like, well, but Anna doesn't really want to come in, so we do still need to make it virtual. And it's fine, okay, but how do we design meetings now that we prioritize the collaboration time together and make those people working virtually an exception rather than the standard that we're used to over the last 12 months? Yep.
Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm currently working for, ironically, a telehealth organisation called Attend Anywhere. And it's interesting, it was probably an organisation of 50 people. And so our service is working here and abroad around, connecting people remotely. But the challenge we've got, and I was explaining to the guys here, I have a CEO I'm working with, and he's sent a directive. He wants everyone to return to the office. So although the culture is about connecting people remotely, that's what he's expecting of people, and it's not working so far, actually, at all. So.
When I was speaking to Mark earlier, he made a really good point, and or maybe David made that point. We had a little triad conversation, but it was about the leadership capability there was already a gap before, but that gap has just been exposed so much more through working from home and through all those additional capabilities that are now required by our leaders to manage a virtual workforce, a remote workforce or hybrid workforce even. Thank you.